Hi, I'm Luke Seerveld. Welcome to another episode of Meet the Gaffer. Today we're going to talk about some of the words that we use in our business that are maybe a little tired and could use some updating. We're going to talk to a fellow gaffer who works out of Toronto. Alex, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Luke.
Could you let me know first how to say your name, and then maybe give us a summary of what the initiative is that we're going to discuss?
Yeah, my last name is Potiainen, which originally is Finnish in origin, and the other half of my family is actually Chinese background. So I'm a little bit of a mix myself, which I'd like to think gives me a bit of a footing to sort of see both sides of issues of diversity and race, especially in situations like this. I'd just like to throw out there just a content warning to viewers. Like, some folks may find some of the content or terms in here triggering or painful or very offensive. So apology in advance. I'll do my best to try to explore these issues in a tactful way, but I just want to put that warning out there. So I've been working as a gaffer here in the commercial and music video world in Toronto for about 9 years now. And anyone who's worked in the grip and electric departments knows we have a lot of strange and esoteric terminology. Often talking to people outside of film, they'll be watching the credits and they'll see words like gaffer, best boy, and have no idea what they mean. And similarly on set, we have all sorts of strange names for our equipment. So a few years ago, I heard the word ubangi in the context of sort of a slang term for a dolly offset. And no one really had a clear idea of like where it came from. I heard different speculations from different folks. But when I went home and started doing some Googling, I discovered there was some pretty nasty racist history behind it, which I thought people should know about. And that sort of got the ball rolling here. Since then, we've talked a lot more about terminology on some of the sets that we've been on, and especially with a lot of tragic situations going on in the world, I think there's a lot more awareness of issues of race and diversity and inclusion. So I thought that maybe updating some of the terms that we use on set would be a good way of making our workplaces more diverse and inclusive.
I'll link to the document that I've seen, and now it's on that document I saw the word NABIT. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that relationship first off?
Yeah, I'm a permittee with one of the largest union locals in Canada, NABIT Unit 4700. So NABIT has been very helpful in collaborating with me in distributing my research, my little research bulletin out to a lot of the other organizations in Toronto here, as well as across the country. So I'm happy to say that we have, I guess we're closing in on around 30 industry partners. So other major union locals such as IATSE 873, as well as some of our largest equipment vendors, William F. White's and MBS, as well as many other industry organizations.
Right on. No, that's awesome. And there's words that you hear that you learn, you get used to, and in some ways, like many industries, those sort of pet names, you kind of hold on to them like they make your work special. For a long time, being a best boy, grip, electric, I took pride in that. So now, why don't we go through some of these terms and break it down a little bit, and then maybe that can open the discussion to some of the suggested alternatives.
The term best boy, for example, there's a lot of speculation about where it comes from. It might be one of those things where we never really get a clear story of like how it came to be. Some people have suggested that it originally comes from the world of sailing or whaling or British theater. So there's quite a spread of guesses, and especially when it's one of these very sort of colloquial things, like it's hard to find a written record and firmly say this is where it came from. I would say that the term best boy can be kind of tricky because it's got the word boy in there. It's sort of inherently gendered, even though like for a long time we've been applying it to whoever fills that role. Just because we've been using it in a way that we think is unisex doesn't mean that it's actually gender neutral. People might think when we talk about transitioning from best boy to something else, at least in official parlance, that we're losing a little bit of film identity, or this is so crazy. Like, why are we going after this term? Like, what's the big deal? But if you think about it, there have been a whole bunch of terms that have already been phased out. As I was doing the research, I found that, for example, the script supervisor role or continuity supervisor role used to be called script girl, or what I think pretty much all of us now will call the boom operator, used to be called boom man in some circles. And now that those terms have disappeared, it's kind of easy to forget that this process has sort of already happened in many places. And do we lose anything by calling someone a camera operator instead of a cameraman, or calling them a camera woman? I don't think there's any like specific thing that we really lose. We just make our workplaces more inclusive and make sure everyone feels comfortable. There are also some real world consequences to having gendered job titles. There have been some studies which suggest that when a profession is associated with being male or being female, when there's a mismatch between the sort of perceived correct gender and individual workers' actual gender, they're often judged more harshly than people who sort of fit that stereotype. I think even though the demographic makeup has changed in a lot of industries, like it's not hard to think of examples. Like, for example, maybe today we might still think of a male nurse as being slightly unexpected, perhaps, even though there's so many men in healthcare these days. That's a good reason not to have a gender job title like best boy, since when, say, there's a woman or someone with another gender identity filling that role, they may have a little bit of experience, a bit of unconscious prejudice from people around them, even if people aren't aware of it. And I'm arguing that we should not completely abandon the term best boy or the term best girl. I'm just suggesting that in official documents such as union agreements, rate sheets, call sheets, we should just default to something that's gender neutral. Like, a couple of my favorites are second electric or best electric. And personally, I love best electric or best grip because it preserves a little bit of that tradition of how it used to be called. And then on an informal basis, people can choose to call themselves best boy, people can choose to call themselves best girl or best whatever they want, really. And it's fun that we can still preserve that room for individual expression, which is important to a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the way you're approaching it, in the sense that, well, it's sort of like Pirates of the Caribbean. It's like, these aren't rules, they're guidelines, in the sense of the way that we approach something. It can be a rolling start kind of thing. On the other hand, it's high time. It's way past time. And it's sort of like the dialogue that's going on in the world right now about racism. It's like, oh, like, that's not new, but we have an opportunity to actually do something. And why don't we? Why don't we get on it? And then that flows into talk of identity and how we talk about each other, or how we use our pronouns and all those kinds of things. Like, the English language is not a very gendered language in a lot of ways. It's not like many languages. For each noun, there's sort of a helper word that lets you know that that's male or female. And that's not so much in English. And back in Shakespeare and Jane Austen times, they would use they and their singularly. And then that kind of changed in Victorian times to be more default was to he. And so these things change over time, and they can change right back. And so often people say, oh no, this is tradition, this has been here forever. And you're like, well, no, actually, things change. And how you look at history, how you read the Bible, how all these things, they have changed over time. And some people want to just keep their foundations rigid. And I think change is just difficult, period. If it's not your idea, change is hard. Why don't we go through some of the terms, just so we have sort of an example. People can read the document, but just here, the one that sticks out is Ubangi. And let's hit that one first.
So the term Ubangi, unfortunately, in our North American and European English, comes from the world of human zoos and human circuses, which is a really ugly chapter in human history. There is a river in Africa called the Ubangi River, And the name of that river was chosen pretty much on the whim of a marketing agent for a circus sideshow, which was exhibiting some African people basically as freaks, which is really tragic and disgusting. To be clear, these people who were put on display were not from anywhere near the Ubangi River itself. They did not self-identify as Ubangi. And from my research, I was unable to find any people in the proximity of the Ubangi River today that use the lip piercing, which these folks who were unfortunately employed in this sideshow were renowned for. So the circus has a lot of really appalling advertisements that you can still find yourself on Google if you search for Ubangi ads, because these African people had a piercing in their lip, which gradually enlarged the size of the lip. And so the marketing agent for the circus literally just looked at a map and said, I like how exotic the name of the Ubangi River sounds. I'm going to advertise these people as Ubangi. The really shocking part to me is that this was in 1930. Like, this was, at first I thought this was going to be in the 1800s or much earlier, but we do have a dark past and kind of a dark present in some ways, I'm sorry to say.
That's seen as a dolly offset. That's a really simple alternative. And so I can see a lot of people thinking like, well, it's just a word. It's kind of like, well, the statues of Southern generals, they're just statues. I mean, no, there's something behind it. And it leads to what are your role models? What are the words you use? They lead to actions. So yeah, I'm sorry, I cut you off, but I just wanted to jump in there.
The word Ubangi in this association probably wouldn't be recognized by a lot of people today. Yes, there is a lot of history behind it and a lot of connotations behind it. Some people are very upset by it. They're very upset by the fact that it ties into this ugly history behind those human zoos and human sideshows, which dealt with dehumanizing people and exoticizing people. And there are real world consequences today, even if most people today would not recognize the word necessarily. And again, going back to the notion of best boy, what valuable part of film history do we really preserve by keeping the word Ubangi when it's associated with such a horrible chapter in our past? I would say there's basically a gigantic downside and minimal upside if we want to reduce it that way.
Yeah, I remember Spike Lee came to town to San Francisco for a shoot, and the story I remember from the dolly grip was that, I don't know if someone used the term or whatever, but it was like a teaching moment for Spike Lee to say, hey guys, before we go forward, that's not a word we're going to use because, and then kind of went through it. And I'll never forget that. So I wasn't on the shoot, but that story, went around town. And it's a real thing. Yeah. And it's not just because we're a bunch of snowflakes or a bunch of cancel culture people or whatever it is. No, this is put yourself in that place and then think about how fun you think it is.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes people's resistance might stem from a lack of understanding of what it feels like to be constantly reminded of your race and to have that feeling of being an other in society. Like I mentioned at the top of this episode, I myself am half Chinese, half Finnish. Nobody ever knows what I am exactly on first look. So I'm sort of constantly reminded of the fact that I'm not exactly white and I'm not exactly Chinese. People are always asking me, like, what are you? What's your background? Where are you from? Those sorts of things. And so when people aren't necessarily reminded of their race on a regular basis by society or by other individuals, then they don't necessarily know the experience of discrimination and prejudice, and that these words can have a real impact.
The other point of that is, some person like me, typical privileged white guy, it often change may start from those that are marginalized, but it needs to happen when we don't just stand by and be silent. We need to, speak up and show up. I'm glad we're having this discussion because there's a lot I can learn. And,
yeah.
Okay, so let's keep going down the list. So I'd never heard of bambula. Is that more of a stage thing, like a sort of like a 4x8 frame with duvetine stretched over it? Tell us a little bit about that.
Bambula might be a sort of Canada-specific word, possibly. Certain elements of film slang can be very regional. I remember having that experience when I first moved from graduating film school on the West Coast to working out here on the East Coast. There were some minor differences I picked up on. Now, the word bambula originally refers to an African drum, and as well as music which involved it, not only in Caribbean as well as Cajun culture. But unfortunately, along the way, it became a racial slur in France, where it still is today. And the word bambula was also used in a lot of really dehumanizing contexts. I'm sorry to say this, like it had the connotations that African people might be, quote, savages or less human than white people. So there's just, again, there's so many ugly associations with this word that I don't think it's worth keeping. There's such huge downsides. And again, what is the upside? What is the valuable part of film history that we preserve by keeping it? So I would say that bambula definitely should go.
Let's just keep going down the list, and I'm wondering if we can speak to China balls.
China balls is a really interesting term to examine. It's been flagged to me by a lot of people wondering like, oh, is this offensive? Should we be saying this? Like, what's the deal with this? In my research for my initiative, I wanted to do a bit of research into it. I also started an online discussion specifically soliciting Chinese or Chinese descended voices to weigh in on the issue. I'm happy to say that most people didn't really find a problem with it, but a couple Chinese folks flagged possible perspectives on it. Like one is that paper lanterns are used all across Asia, not just in China. And some people have personal experiences with, I guess I would say, usually white people when this does happen. People who don't necessarily mean any ill by it, but will, for example, see an Asian person or something like that and just call them Chinese out of reflex. And yeah, and again, like I don't think there's any ill will there. It's just they just don't happen to know better. So there are a lot of people out there who have lived with a sort of erasure of their own national identity. So to people who hold that perspective, calling them China balls sort of erases the fact that, well, they're sort of used all over Asia, and let's not reduce all Asian people into, quote, Chinese people. Another interesting perspective that I did hear about China balls was just the phrasing. Like, we do have a certain number of ethnic references in film, like, for example, Dutch angle, French flag, Russian arm. And if you look at the adjective, they're phrased correctly for English, shall we say, whereas China ball, it would make, if we're going strictly grammatically, it might make more sense to call them Chinese balls, which is interesting due to the fact that there's sort of a history of making fun of Chinese immigrants speaking broken English. There's the legacy of the ugly term Chinaman. So you can kind of see how there's some uncomfortable historical echoes there with China balls. The short answer to the question of China balls is that if you feel uncomfortable about it, or if anyone voices concern, the safe thing to do is just call them paper lanterns. Like, everyone is going to know what you're talking about, and it's just the most considerate thing to do, I guess. Context is everything. Context is what determines whether something is a problem or not, which is a tricky question sometimes. I'll definitely acknowledge that. I would say for Dutch angles, there's a little bit of valuable cinematic history there, that there was this co-opting of canted camera angles from German Expressionism that got co-opted into the American film industry. So not only is there some fun history there to preserve, but I would say more importantly, there isn't necessarily a history of prejudice against German people or against Dutch people that's sort of baked into this term. So I would say keep saying Dutch angle. But that being said, I mean, language is always changing, and we should always be considerate of people's wishes. If for some reason a Dutch person or a German person on your set doesn't like the term, is it such a huge deal if you just choose another word? I mean, we're in the creative industry after all.
That's my background, Dutch. But yeah. And along the same lines, Chinese doors, I hadn't really heard of that one.
I myself have only heard the term Chinese barn doors a couple times on set, sort of earlier on in my career when I would say maybe I wasn't as comfortable in speaking up. And it's just a really crude reference to the stereotype of Asians having slanted or narrow eyes. So the times that I heard it, it was used to refer to the barn doors on a Fresnel being pinched in narrowly. So it's easy to just say, pinch down those doors, or narrow up those barn doors, or go landscape and pinch them down. Like, there's so many ways you could say that aside from making this casually racist remark. And again, there's no history to preserve. And yeah, I'd say there's no reason to keep that.
Totally. And then, yeah, just briefly, we sort of mentioned blacks versus solids. It's like, oh, let's get that 12 by 20 black up. It's just really easy to say, put that solid curtain up, or, let's put a solid here, let's put a cutter here, let's put a wag flag here and there. Wag flag, it's from a DP. It's like it's a point of honor to use a term, a Cardellini. That's a point of honor. You're using someone's name to say this is what they came up with. And blacks is maybe not a huge pejorative, but why? Maybe just call it a solid to make it simple.
So the first time that I had heard somebody suggest using the term solids instead of blacks, they talked especially about a unique case when the fabric is being hung, because it sort of leads to quote, hanging the blacks, which for obvious reasons is not a good thing to be saying in the workplace for any reason, really. And I know I've had the experience of working on sets where some people thought it was funny to start making what I would call racist jokes, like running with that through line. And, I think those people won't necessarily change their minds overnight if we just update a couple of the words in our vocabulary. But by updating the words in our vocabulary, we create fewer opportunities for these sort of ugly existing things to come out in the meantime, while we, I guess, achieve greater progress elsewhere.
That's well put. It's like a local Gaffer friend of mine said that when they were using tungsten, on location more regularly than these days, they were in a prenatal ward of a hospital, and he just yelled out, "Kill the babies," and that wasn't a good thing. If we can learn from the past, why not have a better future?
Yeah, actually, on your note there, just in terms of would you feel comfortable yelling term X across the set is a good test of whether it's a good word or not. In the course of this terminology project, a lot of people have brought up the term butt plug and wondering whether should we retire this. And I guess in my mind, oh, there's one now. I guess in my mind, everyone has a butt. It may not necessarily disproportionately affect one group by race or gender or sexuality necessarily, but I think there's just the broader question. Do you think it's appropriate to use the names of sex toys colloquially on your set? Would you feel comfortable yelling it across a crowded commercial set with a VIP standing in ready to go? I think that's of whether you think something's appropriate or not. Is it necessarily discriminatory or racist or sexist? I don't think so. But at the same time, does it sound very professional? No.
An easy way to gauge whether it's worthwhile. And then it steps into a discussion of what is your worldview? What are the foundational principles of your life? Do you want to always be quick to denigrate those that you think are lesser? It's like, why? Is that how you want to be treated? And that's golden rule time. So yeah, it seems like this would be straightforward, but history has shown us that we can be jerks. We can be real demeaning people. So I talked about this once on an episode where you're hooking up cable and you're running off a generator, and to just a rule of thumb of knowing which side goes where, it's like, F the truck. It's like, okay, yeah, that's a nice crude way of remembering that, but no, it's either, I don't know, yeah, male to tail, I guess would be another way of saying it, but now you've genderized that as well. So yeah, just put the pins to the power. That's easy.
I like that one, pins to power, very simple.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I guess, there's lots of ways that we talk about male, female with plugs, with, just simple receivers. So it can be pin to receiver or plug to socket. It's that's not difficult, and it doesn't take much. Now, baby junior. I don't know. Maybe there's some offense there. I don't know. Maybe a baby pin, is somehow sexual. But I'm hoping we can keep baby and junior, because that's true for grip stuff and it's true for lighting. Now, you're not going to have babies and juniors tungsten land forever. But we'll always be comparing to them, even if we've moved over to LEDs. So, yeah. Some more things. I was just thinking of anecdotal stuff that's more regional. And when I was working in Minnesota, there was a big and tall man's store called Jerry Leonard, I think it was. And so the large cutters, 2x6 cutter was a Jerry Leonard. Maybe it's not a Jerry Leonard, but anyway, that was 30 years ago, so I probably have the name wrong too. But anyway, that was just something that people came up with. And, or you have a short move on the dolly and you call it a Mickey Rooney. All right, so we're so clever. It's like, yeah, is it necessary?
Yeah.
No.
I guess like the question of the Jerry Leonard, or I guess whatever that name was out in Minnesota, to me, at least at the face of it, it sounds like it could be like one of those fun esoteric pieces of film history or regional knowledge. Is it necessarily hurtful to anyone? Maybe not, but yeah, let's just keep our ears open and see if anyone thinks of any reasons why it might not be a good reason. I think there's still lots of room to have fun with language in film, as long as we're considerate.
Yeah. I mean, if someone's on set and they yell out, give me a fat Luke, it's like, okay, yeah, maybe I'd have a problem with that. I don't even know what that would be. But if you make it personal, it's like when you know someone who's been abused or on the end of sexism or racism, or you have been there, then it's that much more immediate, and you're like, okay, I understand this. Sometimes it takes that, sadly. But
And I think an important thing to recognize as well is that I don't think I'm going out on a limb here and saying that white people have a diversity of opinions. By that same token, if we were to divide the world into other groups, black people have a diversity of opinions, women have a diversity of opinions. So some people may not find a term offensive or objectionable, but that doesn't mean that other people from that group may not have an objection. And just because I could find someone from one group that says, I don't have a problem with this, that doesn't mean that there isn't a problem with it necessarily. So we should try to be considerate in that way as well.
yeah, no, it just sounds like a good way to live life. Yeah. I remember we would call a gold lame, 8x gold lame or whatever, would be an Elvis. And then the silver version would be a Priscilla. And then the checkerboard would be a Lisa Marie, And yeah, I don't even know if that's still in use, and it didn't seem like that was really a negative. I don't know, it's like, if you're a celebrity, do you have more license? I don't know. It's like the good ones, like, an Abby Singer. That's a great story, of a guy who worked forever in Hollywood and would often say, look, in order to save his director time, he'd say to the crew, okay, when they'd ask, oh, how many more shots we got or whatever, he's like, well, we've got this one and then one more. So they'd know that they could start wrapping after this shot, or, get stuff ready for the move. And he would save his director 10 minutes, each shot. And at the end of the day, that was like an extra hour. So the Abby Singer being the second to last shot, that has a great story behind it. And so it's like, yeah, let's keep using that. Let's remember that. I don't know about a martini. Maybe that's an alcoholic, issue, but that too has more of a, yeah, it's not racist or sexist or problematic in other ways. But if someone has a problem with it, hey, let's discuss it. Let's bring it up. Let's think of something else. Last shot. That's pretty easy.
I guess in terms of bringing it up, I know like down south, everyone loves to talk about freedom of speech. Like anyone can say whatever they want at any time. Like if somebody had found this term offensive, which I've been using for the last 20 years, like they would have spoken up. Therefore, it's not offensive because I haven't heard anyone tell me. But the thing is, we have to remember in reality, even though if everyone on set is theoretically free to speak up whenever they have a problem with something, I can speak from firsthand experience. When I was starting out as a daily on bigger productions, I heard I saw some pretty objectionable, and I felt very intimidated. I didn't know how to bring up my issues. I was worried about fitting in with the rest of the team. I didn't want to stand out and be that complaining guy. Or say in the tech departments, maybe there's pressure to be strong and not show that compassionate, considerate side, especially. And pragmatically, when you're that daily, there's like 7 of you, and there's only going to be 4 callbacks tomorrow. You don't want to be the squeaky wheel, or you don't want to be the person who stands out and doesn't get the callback for tomorrow when you're young and desperate for money. So you might start to let things slide. So it's important to remember that there's a lot of real world power dynamics which prevent people from speaking up. And hopefully we'll break down some of those barriers going forward and be able to speak more freely to each other.
That's awesome. I love it. That's a good place to end. Thank you so much for spending time to bring us up to speed on some of the historical aspects behind these words, behind these attitudes in a way. Yeah, when you diversify the workforce, then it brings into sharp focus that a lot of these words are not appropriate, and they haven't been, but now they're really not. And so why not get on a better path and work together and have appropriate language that we all can understand and appreciate.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think especially in the entertainment industry, like we have a special responsibility, not only like in every workforce, we want to build a diverse and inclusive workplace, but also the fact that being in the media, we shape everyone else's perceptions of the world. So I think we want to be straight with everything we do. So I'm looking forward to a brighter future, I hope.
Fantastic. Hey, thank you so much, Alex, and hope we run into each other in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.